At 19, Alara had already learned the sharp-edged math of loss, the way grief subtracts not just a person, but the world that person held in place. Her mother was gone, and with her went the gravity that held their small family together. All her older sisters, Clara and Serena, who should have been her anchors in the sudden storm, left her, was the deed to a shuttered roadside diner the world called worthless, a clapboard box of peeling paint and bad memories on a forgotten stretch of highway. They sold it to her for the grand and insulting sum of $1, a transaction of performative generosity that was really just a shedding of a burden, a way to pass the property taxes and the ghosts onto the youngest, the quietest, the one they had always known how to make small. And they laughed, a sound like tearing silk, as they drove away from the lawyer's office in a car filled with the polished cherry wood and silver heirlooms of the family home, leaving Alara on the curb with nothing but a cardboard box of clothes and a single worn wooden lemon reamer she had slipped into her pocket when no one was looking. But what nobody knew, what Clara and Serena in their gleaming efficiency could never comprehend, was that the diner's true ledger was not written in red ink, but in deeds, its value not in the square footage of the lot, but in the memory held within its grease-stained walls. What was hidden there was a currency of kindness, a fortune of quiet favors that had compounded over 30 years. That, though, comes later. First, there was the silence, and the rain, and the walk to a place she was supposed to call her own, but felt, for all the world, like the end of it. The key felt cold and useless in her hand, the small jagged piece of metal that promised entry into nothing more than a deeper loneliness. The world had shrunk to the size of this one desolate acre. The laughter of her sisters was the last thing she heard of her old life, and it echoed long after their tail lights had vanished down the road, a final, cutting severance. First, there was the house, the one she had grown up in, smelling of baked bread and her mother's lemon polish. After the funeral, it stopped smelling like anything at all. It was just a space filled with objects, and Clara and Serena moved through those objects like appraisers, their voices low and sharp, cataloging, claiming, dividing. Alara sat on the bottom stair, the one that had always creaked, and watched them. Clara, the eldest, with her sharp suits and her sharper smile, held a clipboard. She tapped a pen against it, a rhythmic, impatient sound that set Alara's teeth on edge. Serena, softer but orbiting Clara like a nervous moon, would pick things up, a porcelain shepherdess, a stack of linen napkins, and look to Clara for a verdict, a nod, and it went into the keep pile. A slight shake of the head, and it was destined for the estate sale. They never asked Alara what she wanted. They assumed she wanted nothing, or that what she wanted did not matter. Her grief was a quiet, inconvenient thing in the face of their brisk, competent sorrow. They had cried at the funeral, perfect, contained tears. Now they were all business. The will was simple, read by a man in a tired suit whose gaze kept drifting to the window. Lena, their mother, had left everything to be divided equally among her 3 daughters. The house, the savings account, which was smaller than Clara and Serena had hoped, a fact that drew a thin white line around Clara's mouth, and the diner, Lena's place. When the lawyer read that part, a weary sigh escaped Clara's lips. "The money pit," she said, not to anyone in particular. "What are we supposed to do with that relic?" Serena murmured something about selling the land. Maybe a developer would want it for the highway access, but Clara just shook her head. "We'd be lucky to get scrap value after we pay the back taxes." She looked at Alara then, a sudden bright, predatory gleam in her eye. It was the first time she had truly looked at her all day. Alara felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. She knew that look. It was the look that came before Clara got what she wanted. The days that followed were a blur of boxes and packing tape. The sisters moved with a synchronized efficiency, emptying rooms, closets, memories. They took the heavy oak dining table, where their mother had helped them with their homework. They took the silver-framed photographs from the mantelpiece. They took the worn floral armchair where Lena used to sit and read, the impression of her body still faintly visible in the cushions. Alara didn't fight them. She didn't have the words or the strength. She just moved from room to room, a ghost in her own history, touching the cool, empty spaces on the walls where pictures used to hang. She packed her own small box, a few changes of clothes, a handful of books, the worn copy of her mother's favorite cookbook, its pages softened and stained with fingerprints of flour and vanilla. The last thing she took was the lemon reamer from the utensil crock in the kitchen. It was made of pale, smooth wood, worn down by decades of her mother's hand-turning it, again and again, to make lemonade for the diner. It was a simple, worthless thing. It was everything. The day the lawyer called them back, the house was already echoing and empty. Clara laid out the plan. It was, she explained, a kindness. They would sell the house and split the proceeds. They would split the savings. As for the diner, with its debts and its disrepair, it was a liability, a drain. But, she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit sympathy, she knew how much Ilara had loved spending time there with Mom. So they had an offer, a gift, really. They would sign the diner over to her, all hers, for $1. Serena shifted her weight, her eyes darting to the floor. She wouldn't meet Ilara's gaze. Ilara looked at the papers the lawyer pushed across the table. Her name was already typed onto them. She saw the figures for the outstanding property taxes, the utility shut-off notices. She saw the word "Ausis" underlined. It was a perfectly legal, perfectly cruel way of leaving her with less than nothing. It was a way to look generous while handing her an anchor and telling her to swim. "You don't have to," Serena whispered, so low only Ilara could hear. Clara's head snapped toward her. "Don't be ridiculous, Serena. It's a wonderful opportunity for her. A little project." The words hung in the air, sterile and false. Ilara looked from Clara's polished smile to Serena's guilty shame. She thought of the diner, of the smell of coffee and frying bacon, of her mother's tired, happy face at the end of a long day. She thought of having nowhere else to go. She picked up the pen. She did not look at her sisters as she signed her name, her hands steady. She pushed the papers back across the desk. Then she reached into her pocket, pulled out a single, crumpled dollar bill she'd been saving, and laid it on the table. "Paid in full," she said, her voice quiet but clear. For a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of something in Clara's eyes, not triumph, but surprise, as if she'd expected a fight or tears. The absence of them seemed to unsettle her more than any protest could have. Then it was gone, replaced by the cool, smooth mask of victory. They left her there, in the lawyer's stuffy office. The finality of it was absolute. They took the house, they took the savings, they took the past, and they left her with a key to a ruin, and the echoing memory of their laughter. Her mother, Lena, was a woman carved from patience and flour dust. The town knew her as the owner of Lena's place, a fixture as constant and unassuming as the cracked pavement of the highway out front. They saw a woman in a faded apron, her hands chapped, her hair perpetually escaping its bun in wisps of gray and brown. They knew the taste of her coffee, which was strong and honest, and her pies, which were the kind of good that made you close your eyes. But they didn't truly know her. They saw the cook, the proprietor. They missed the woman. Ilara knew her. She knew the quiet sigh her mother gave at 5 in the morning as she tied on her apron, a sound not of weariness but of readiness. She knew the way her mother's hands, rough as they were, could be impossibly gentle, as they bandaged a scraped knee or kneaded a ball of dough. Lena never spoke of virtue. She just acted it out in small daily increments. Her operating philosophy was simple, and she had repeated it to Ilara so many times it had become a kind of catechism. "A full plate is a paid bill," she'd say, sliding a steaming platter in front of a trucker whose wallet had been stolen, or a teenager who had run away from home and was trying to look like they weren't hungry. She kept a running tab, but everyone knew Lena's tab was a place where debts went to be forgotten. Across the highway from the diner was a hardware store, a low, sprawling building that smelled of sawdust and metal and oil. It was run by a man named Arthur, whose face was a road map of wrinkles, and whose hands were permanently stained with something that looked like rust. He had known Lena for 40 years. After Alara had signed the papers, after she had stood on the curb and watched her sisters drive away, she found herself walking not to the diner, but across the street to Arthur's store. The little bell above the door chimed a lonely sound in the afternoon quiet. Arthur was behind the counter, meticulously sorting screws into a wooden tray. He looked up, and his expression softened when he saw her. He didn't ask what happened. He seemed to already know. He just wiped his hands on a rag and pulled out a stool. "Sit," he said. It wasn't a question. Alara sat. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the metallic click of screws dropping into their designated compartments. Finally, Arthur stopped sorting. He leaned his elbows on the counter, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the dusty windows. "Your mother," he said, his voice a low rumble. "She was a better woman than this town deserved." He told Alara stories she had never heard or had only half understood as a child. He told her about the winter of the big blizzard, when the highway shut down and a bus full of strangers was stranded. The motels were full. Lena had opened the diner. She unlocked the doors, fired up the grill, and spent the next 2 days cooking for them, letting them sleep in the booths, wrapped in tablecloths and aprons for warmth. She never charged them a dime, said their fear had paid the bill. Arthur recalled a small wry smile touching his lips. He told her about a young man, a boy really, who had tried to rob the diner once, waving a tire iron and demanding the cash from the register. Lena had just looked at him, her expression not of fear but of a deep, profound pity. She'd asked him when he had last eaten a hot meal. The boy had broken down crying. She'd made him a steak dinner, the most expensive thing on the menu, and then she'd called a friend of hers who owned a garage and got the boy a job sweeping floors. That boy was now the foreman of the biggest construction crew in the county. She collected people, not money, Arthur said, finally looking at Alara. His eyes were clear and kind. She saw the hole in them and put a little bit of herself in to fill it. Most folks, they look at a person and see what they can get. Your mother. She looked and saw what she could give. He reached under the counter and pulled out 2 things, a thermos and a paper bag. He pushed them toward her. "Coffee's hot. Sandwich is roast beef. Your mother's favorite." Alara looked at the bag, a lump forming in her throat. She hadn't realized how hungry she was, how the hollowness inside her was not just grief, but a physical ache. "How much do I owe you?" she whispered. Arthur's face crinkled into a genuine smile. He tapped the counter with a thick finger. "Your mother paid for it 20 years ago when she brought me soup every day for a week after my wife passed. Some accounts never close, kid. Now go on. You've got work to do." He was right. Lena's goodness hadn't been a grand public spectacle. It was 1,000 small, unrecorded acts of grace, a quiet accumulation of decency that the world had mistaken for simplicity. Clara and Serena saw a failing business. They couldn't see the real enterprise. They had inherited the assets, the numbers on a page. Alara, holding the warm thermos and the key to the shuttered diner, was beginning to understand that she had been left with a legacy. Her mother had never sought thanks, had never wanted credit. She believed that goodness was its own reward. A full plate is a paid bill. The phrase echoed in Alara's mind, no longer just a saying, but a blueprint, a promise, a challenge. She was starting to see that the diner wasn't an ending. It was an inheritance of a different kind, a place built not of wood and nails, but of invisible, unbreakable bonds. The formal betrayal came dressed as a favor. Clara had called Alara to the lawyer's office a second time, a week after they had cleared out the house. The air in the room was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and unspoken truths. Clara sat perfectly poised, her hands folded on the polished mahogany table. Serena sat beside her, smaller, diminished, her gaze fixed on a point on the far wall as if staring too long at it could make her disappear. "We've been thinking," Clara began, her voice smooth as cream. "About you, Alara. About your future." She spoke of the diner not as a business but as a project, a creative venture. She painted a picture of Alara, young and full of potential, turning the forgotten little place into something charming, something quaint. A boutique cafe, perhaps. She used words like passion and opportunity, words that felt alien and sharp in the context of her mother's worn-out coffee pots and cracked vinyl booths. "We know how much you love being there with Mom," Clara continued, the feigned sentimentality making Alara's skin crawl. "It seems only right that it should be yours." The lawyer, the same man with the tired suit, cleared his throat and pushed a sheaf of documents across the table. "As you know," he droned, "the estate is to be divided 3 ways. The house has an offer, a good one, and the savings are what they are. The diner, however, the diner carries significant liabilities, outstanding property taxes, various liens from suppliers." He trailed off, letting the weight of the words settle. Clara picked up the thread. "It would be a drain on the estate. It would eat into what little Mom left. It would, frankly, eat into your share, Alara, and Serena's and mine." She paused, letting the implication land. The diner was a poison pill. If they split it 3 ways, they would all be harmed. But she, Clara, had devised a more elegant solution, a more generous one. "We are prepared," she announced, as if bestowing a great honor, "to sign our shares of the diner over to you. Completely. You would be the sole proprietor. We will sell it to you, to make it legal and binding, for $1. Serena flinched, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. Her betrayal was not cold and clean like Clara's. It was messy, riddled with a guilt she was too weak to act upon. She was complicit, out of fear, a silent partner in the cruelty. Alara looked at the papers. She saw the numbers, the red ink, the legal clauses that transferred every ounce of the diner's debt squarely onto her shoulders. It was a masterfully constructed trap, designed to look like a gift. They were not giving her a diner. They were giving her their debt, their problem, their tax burden, and wrapping it in the language of love and memory. It was a way to disinherit her while appearing magnanimous. They could tell the world they gave their little sister a business to start her life with. They could omit the part where that business was designed to sink her. "You would be freeing us up," Clara said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "to manage the sale of the house, to settle the rest of the estate efficiently. It's better for everyone this way. You get your fresh start, and we can handle the practicalities. The practicalities. The money. That was all it had ever been about for them. They had looked at their mother's life and seen only a balance sheet. The love, the community, the 30 years of 5 in the morning starts. That was all just sentimental noise to be cleared away with the old furniture." Alara felt a strange calm settle over her. The hurt was still there, a deep, cold stone in her chest, but the shock was gone. This was who they were. This was who they had always been, and her mother's presence had simply softened their edges, blurred their true lines. Without her, they were sharp and clear. She thought of her mother's hands on the worn comptop. She thought of the smell of coffee. She thought of Arthur's words. She collected people, not money. And she knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that she would not give them the satisfaction of her refusal, or her tears. She would take their poison pill and see if she could turn it into medicine. She signed the papers. She slid the $1 bill across the table, paid in full. The act was done. They stood, their relief palpable. Clara's smile was brittle and bright. Serena mumbled a goodbye and hurried out of the room. Clara paused at the door. "We'll have the house cleared by Friday," she said. "You'll need to find somewhere else to stay." Of course. Of course. She was homeless now, the owner of a ruined diner. It was perfect. On Friday, they were true to their word. A moving truck sat in the driveway, its belly full of her childhood. Clara and Serena directed the movers, their voices crisp. When it was all done, the truck pulled away, and the two sisters got into Clara's sleek, dark car. They didn't hug her goodbye. Clara just rolled down the window. "Good luck with the diner, Alara," she said, and the words were not a wish but a verdict. "Try not to run it into the ground any faster than Mom did." Then they were gone. Ilara stood on the empty street, the curb cool beneath her feet. In her hand she held a cardboard box with her clothes. In her pocket she held a key. The sun was setting, casting long, lonely shadows down the street. She was 19 years old, and she was utterly, completely alone. But she was not broken. She turned her back on the empty house and started walking toward the highway, toward the peeling paint and the faded sign, toward the only thing in the world she had left. The walk to the diner was longer than she remembered. Each step was a deliberate choice, a movement away from the hollowed-out shell of her family home and toward an unknown, derelict future. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the sky was a bruise of purple and orange. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant exhaust fumes. The diner appeared at the crest of a small hill, a dark silhouette against the fading light. Lena's place. The sign, shaped like a coffee cup, was barely legible, its neon tubes dark and broken, its paint flaking away to reveal rust underneath. The building itself seemed to be sighing, its shoulders slumped, its windows boarded over with graying plywood. It didn't look like a place of business. It looked like a place that had given up. Weeds grew thick and tenacious in the cracks of the parking lot. A faded for sale sign, years old, was tilted at a drunken angle near the road. This was her inheritance. This was her $1 kingdom. Alara stopped in the gravel lot, the crunch of her sneakers loud in the evening quiet. The place smelled of stale grease, rain-soaked wood, and something else, something deeper, the scent of time itself, of years of abandonment. It was the smell of a place that had been holding its breath for too long. The key felt small and inadequate in her palm as she approached the front door. The lock was stiff with rust and disuse. She had to put her shoulder into it, turning the key with both hands until, with a groan of protesting metal, the bolt finally slid back. The door swung inward on a single, long, complaining squeak, opening into a chasm of darkness. She fumbled along the wall for the light switch, her fingers meeting cobwebs and peeling paint. She flicked it up. Nothing. Of course, the power had been cut off long ago. The only light was the weak, gray twilight filtering through the grimy front windows that weren't boarded over. It was enough to see by, just barely. The diner was a time capsule. It was exactly as it had been left on the day her mother had gotten the call from the doctor, the day she had hung up her apron for the last time. A broom leaned against the counter, a small pile of dust and crumbs swept halfway across the floor. On the counter, a coffee cup sat next to a stack of paper napkins. The salt and pepper shakers stood at attention on each table, little silver soldiers guarding a forgotten post. The air inside was thick and still, heavy with the ghosts of 1,000 conversations, 1,000,000 orders of coffee and eggs. Ilara could almost hear them, the low rumble of truckers talking about the price of diesel, the laughter of a family on a road trip, the clatter of cutlery on ceramic. And beneath it all, her mother's voice calm and steady. "Honor, what can I get for you?" She walked behind the counter, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She ran her hand along the edge of the stainless steel prep table, cold and inert. She looked at the massive grill, its surface dark and dormant. This had been her mother's domain, her stage. From this small, cramped space, she had orchestrated a universe of simple comforts. Ilara slid onto one of the stools. The red vinyl cracked and cold. She rested her elbows on the counter, the formica worn smooth in the exact spot where her mother had leaned for 30 years, writing down orders, talking to customers, watching the highway. Her own hands resting on that spot seemed small and pale. She could feel it then, under the layers of dust and decay, under the weight of abandonment, a flicker. It wasn't just a building, it was a witness. This counter had held her mother's weariness at the end of a 16-hour day. The floor had borne the weight of her endless pacing. The very air was imbued with her presence. This was the last place on earth that was truly hers. Grief, sharp and sudden, washed over Alara, a physical wave that made her gasp. She bent over, pressing her forehead against the cool, worn surface of the counter, and finally let the tears come. They were not the wild, ragged sobs of a child, but the silent, hot tears of a profound and lonely sorrow. She cried for her mother. She cried for her own lost childhood. She cried for the cruelty of her sisters and the emptiness of the house behind her. She cried until she was hollowed out, until there was nothing left but the ache. And as she sat there, in the deepening dark, a sound from the back of the diner made her lift her head. A soft thump, followed by a low whine. It wasn't the sound of the building settling. It was the sound of something alive. Alara froze, her breath catching in her throat. The sound came again, a soft scratch and another low, plaintive whine, coming from the direction of the back door that led out to the dumpster and the small, overgrown patch of grass behind the diner. Her first thought was of a wild animal, a raccoon or a possum, trapped inside. She pushed herself off the stool, her heart thumping a nervous rhythm against her ribs. She felt her way through the darkness of the kitchen, her hands brushing against cold, silent equipment. The back door had a small, grimy window at eye level. She peered through it. In the near-total darkness, she could just make out a shape huddled on the concrete step outside a lump of gray and black fur. It was a dog. As her eyes adjusted, she saw the shape more clearly. It was an old dog, a big, scruffy mutt, with a muzzle gone completely white with age. He was curled into a tight ball against the door, shivering slightly in the evening chill. He wasn't scratching to get in. He was just there as if waiting. She remembered him. He was a stray, one of the nameless, placeless creatures that haunted the edges of the highway. Her mother had called him Gus. He'd started showing up a few years ago. A shadow at the edge of the parking lot. Too timid to come close, but too hungry to leave. Lena had started leaving a bowl of scraps for him by the back door every night. She never tried to pet him, never tried to leash him. She just fed him. He's his own man, she would say. He just needs a little help, same as anyone. And now, here he was, keeping a silent, faithful vigil at a door that hadn't opened in months. He wasn't waiting for scraps. He was waiting for Lena. The realization hit Alara with the force of a physical blow. This old forgotten dog was the only other living creature who seemed to be mourning her mother. He was the only one who had stayed. She slowly, carefully, unlocked the back door. It creaked open, and the dog lifted his head. He looked at her with eyes that were cloudy with age, but full of a deep, ancient intelligence. He didn't bark. He didn't run. He just watched her, his tail giving a single tentative thump against the concrete. "Hey, Gus," she whispered. Her voice was rough. The dog whined softly and struggled to his feet, his back leg stiff. He took a hesitant step toward her, then another. He nudged her hand with his cold nose, a gesture of quiet recognition. He wasn't her dog, but he was her mother's dog, and in that moment, that was the same thing. She let him in, and he padded silently into the dark kitchen, his nails clicking softly on the linoleum. He made a slow circuit of the room, sniffing at the base of the cold stove, the empty corner where his food bowl used to be. Then he walked past her, into the main dining area, and lay down on the dusty floor, right beside the stool where she had been sitting, and let out a long, weary sigh. He was home. She wasn't alone anymore. The next morning, the bell above the hardware store door chimed as Alara walked in. Arthur looked up from his counter. Figured you'd be by, he said. Need a generator? I need everything, Alara admitted. Cleaning supplies. Light bulbs. A bucket. He nodded slowly, taking in her tired eyes and the determined set of her jaw. Everything's a good place to start, he said. He began to gather things, moving with a slow, deliberate purpose. Heavy-duty cleaner, sponges, a mop. He loaded them into a cardboard box. When he was done, he looked at her. You ate? She shook her head. He disappeared into a back room and came back with a thermos, a paper bag, and a large can of dog food. He added it to the box. For your partner, he said with a slight smile. Saw him keeping watch all winter. Stubborn old fool, just like your mother. He slid the box across the counter. Alara reached for her pocket for the few crumpled bills she had left. Arthur put a large, firm hand on top of hers, stopping her. I told you, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Your mother's credit is still good here. It will always be good here. Family doesn't keep a tab. The word hung in the air between them. Family. He wasn't talking about Clara and Serena. He was redefining the word for her, right there in the quiet, dusty hardware store. Family wasn't blood. It wasn't a name. It was the people who showed up, the people who brought you a sandwich when you were hungry, the people who fed your dog. He helped her carry the supplies across the highway. He didn't offer advice or ask prying questions. He just set the box down inside the diner door, gave a nod to Gus, who thumped his tail in response and looked at Alara. A place is just a place, he said, his eyes scanning the dusty, derelict room. It's the hands that work it, that give it a soul. Your mother gave this place its soul. Don't you let it die. He turned and walked back to his store, leaving Alara in the doorway. The scent of bleach and fresh coffee mixing with the old, stale air of the diner. She had a box of supplies. She had a dog at her feet. She had a neighbor who believed in her. It wasn't much, it was a start. She looked at the broom, still leaning against the counter where her mother had left it. She picked it up. The wood was smooth and familiar in her hands. She took a deep breath and began to sweep. Finishing the job her mother had started, the days that followed took on a shape, a rhythm of hard, solitary labor. Alara worked from sunrise until long after the highway lights came on, fueled by Arthur's sandwiches and a stubborn burning need to reclaim the space from time and neglect. With the generator humming a steady drone out back, a string of bare bulbs cast a harsh, bright light over the diner, chasing the shadows from the corners. She scrubbed away years of accumulated grime, the water in her bucket turning a dark, soupy gray again and again. She scraped peeling paint, wiped down every surface, and polished the stainless steel until it gleamed with a faint, ghostly reflection of its former self. Gus was her constant shadow, a quiet, reassuring presence. He'd lie just out of her way, his old head on his paws, watching her with those patient, knowing eyes. Every so often, he would get up, stretch his stiff limbs, and nudge her hand with his nose, a silent check-in before settling back into his vigil. The diner slowly began to breathe again. As she cleaned, she discovered the place's secret language, the particular squeak of the third stool from the end, the way the afternoon sun, slanting through the clean front windows, would strike a specific spot on the floor at precisely 4 o'clock. The worn patch on the linoleum behind the counter, a perfect semicircle carved by her mother's feet pivoting between the grill and the coffee pots for 3 decades. It was in the pantry, a small windowless room off the kitchen, that she first felt it, a sense of wrongness, a note out of key. The pantry was lined with deep, sturdy wooden shelves, now mostly empty save for a few dusty, rust-ringed cans of tomato sauce and a forgotten bag of flour, hard as a rock. The walls were old lath and plaster, cracked and uneven in places, all except for one section. The back wall, the one that separated the pantry from the diner's outer wall, felt different. It was a smooth, flat expanse of drywall, jarringly new compared to the rest of the room's textured history. Ilara ran her hand over it. It was cool and impersonal. She knocked on it. The sound was flat, solid. But as she moved her hand to the right, toward the corner, the sound changed. She knocked again. Thump, 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 hollow. A strange, empty echo that didn't belong. She dismissed it at first. A shoddy repair job, maybe. Her mother had mentioned a leak in the roof on that side years ago. Perhaps a plumber had to cut into the wall and patched it up poorly. But the thought niggled at her. It was a loose thread, and she couldn't stop herself from pulling at it. Later that week, as she was on her hands and knees scrubbing the pantry floor, she saw something else. The old linoleum was a geography of wear and tear, its patterns faded and scuffed. But the scuff marks, the dark lines left by countless shoes and dragged boxes, told a story. Most of them led to and from the pantry door, or fanned out in front of the shelves. But a distinct set of marks, deeper than the others, all converged on one spot. They led directly to the hollow-sounding section of the back wall, not away from it, to it, as if people, or heavy things, had been moved to that spot repeatedly over many, many years. It was the dog, however, that turned her suspicion into certainty. Gus, who had until then been content to lie in the main dining area, started spending his time in the pantry. He would post himself directly in front of that section of drywall, lying with his body pressed against the baseboard. He wasn't sniffing at it or scratching. He was guarding it. He would lie there for hours, a silent, gray-muzzled sentinel, and if Ilara came into the pantry to get something, he would lift his head and watch her, his gaze unwavering, until she left. It was his spot, and his spot was the anomaly. One evening, she stood in the pantry doorway watching him. The single bare bulb overhead cast a stark light on the smooth drywall and the old dog lying before it. An oiled hinge, a wall built wrong, an unfinished thing. The archetypes of secrets. Her mother had been a straightforward woman. She didn't have secrets. Or so Ilara had thought, but this wall felt like a secret. It felt like something deliberately hidden, something sealed away. She knelt beside Gus and ran a hand down his back. He leaned into her touch, letting out a low rumble of contentment. "What do you know, old man?" she whispered. "What did she hide in there?" The dog just looked at her, his cloudy eyes seeming to hold the answer she couldn't yet grasp. The feeling was too strong to ignore. It was a hum beneath the surface of things, a story waiting to be read. The next day, she went to see Arthur. "I need a crowbar," she said, without preamble. He didn't ask why. He just led her to the back of the store, to a rack of long, heavy tools. He selected one, its metal end worn and scarred. "Sometimes," he said, handing it to her, "the only way to fix something is to break it open first." The crowbar felt heavy and purposeful in her hands. Back in the diner, the air was thick with anticipation. Gus stood beside her, his body tense, as if he understood what was about to happen. He let out a soft whine, a sound of encouragement. Ilara stood before the wall, the smooth, blank face of the drywall looking back at her. This felt like a violation, a desecration. But Arthur's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the only way to fix something is to break it open first. She took a deep breath, positioned the flat end of the crowbar against the seam where the drywall met the corner, and struck the other end with the heel of her hand. The sound was a dull thud. She did it again, harder. A crack appeared. She pushed the wedge of the crowbar into the crack and leaned into it with all her weight. With a groaning tear, a section of the drywall pulled away from the studs behind it. The air that rushed out was not the smell of insulation and old wood. It was the smell of paper and leather and time. A dry, dusty, archival scent. She pulled away the rest of the broken drywall, her heart hammering. It wasn't a wall. It was a door. A false front. Behind it was a shallow, hidden cabinet, built neatly between the wall studs. It was about 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, a space no deeper than a foot. And it was full. It was packed to capacity with dozens of identical, leather-bound books. They were old order-taking ledgers, the kind her mother used to write down tickets on, with a carbon copy for the kitchen. They were stacked neatly, chronologically, with small faded labels on their spines, 1985, 1986, 1987, and on, all the way to the last year the diner was open. Alara reached in and took out the first one, the one marked 1985. The leather was cool and dry, the cover embossed with the name of a restaurant supply company that had probably gone out of business decades ago. She opened it. The pages were filled with her mother's handwriting, a neat, slightly slanted cursive that was as familiar to Alara as her own reflection. At first glance, it looked exactly like what it was supposed to be. A record of food orders. BLT. No mayo. 2 eggs over easy, side of bacon. Cheeseburger deluxe, extra pickles. But then she saw the notes, scribbled in the margins in a different colored ink. Next to an order for coffee and a slice of apple pie, there was a small notation. Told me he lost his job. No charge. Next to a ticket for a family of 4 that had ordered 4 full steak dinners. There was another note. Car broke down. Let them pay next time they're through. Filled their gas tank. She flipped through the pages, her bewilderment growing. It was all there, page after page, year after year. It wasn't just a record of sales, it was a secret history. A meticulous hidden accounting of every act of kindness, every quiet favor, every uncollected debt of gratitude her mother had extended over 30 years. The 12th of December, 1988, fixed the Miller boy's tire after he got a flat-out front. Cost: 1 new tire from the garage. Paid with 2 bacon cheeseburgers and a promise to check on his grandma. The 3rd of February, 1992, paid for Mrs. Gable's prescription at the pharmacy. She'll pay me back when she can. Told her not to worry. The 21st of July, 1997, gave the Henderson family $200 for a bus ticket back to Ohio after their car was repossessed. They left their spare tent as collateral. I told them to keep it. The ledgers were filled with it. It was a breathtaking, staggering record of her mother's hidden life. This was her real work. The food was just the vehicle. The diner wasn't a business that failed. It was a charity that had operated in secret for 3 decades. The money Clara and Serena had been so disappointed not to find in her savings account hadn't been squandered. It had been invested. It had been poured, dollar by dollar, into the lives of hundreds of people. It had been converted into a different kind of currency. Ilara sank to the floor of the pantry, the open ledger in her lap. Gus came and rested his heavy head on her knee. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. Her mother, the woman she thought she knew so well, had been quietly, single-handedly holding up a corner of the world. She had built a fortune not of cash, but of goodwill. Clara and Serena saw a worthless building. They had no idea that the real inheritance, the true family vault, was hidden behind a thin sheet of drywall in a dusty pantry. Ilara looked at the rows of ledgers still sitting in the hidden cabinet. They were a library of grace. They were the story of a life well lived, and she was now their sole keeper. The weight of it, the beauty of it, was immense. This place wasn't a ruin, it was a monument. And the foundation was made of something far stronger than concrete and steel. If you have stayed with this story this far, if you have sat in the dust with a forgotten girl and a faithful dog, if you have felt the chill of the empty diner and the warmth of a neighbor's kindness, then stay a little longer. Stay for the turning of the page. Because what happens next, what was found in the last of those hidden books, is the part I have been waiting to tell you. It is the part where a quiet legacy finds its voice, where a debt of goodness is called due, and where a daughter finally understands the true inheritance her mother left behind. The world is quick to measure worth in things that can be counted, in dollars and in square feet. But some values are written in an ink that is invisible to the greedy and the hurried. They are written in the margins of everyday life. And those are the accounts that in the end matter most. The story of Lena's place was not over. It had only just begun. The discovery of the ledgers changed everything. They were no longer just books. They were proof. They were a testament. Alara spent the next several days poring over them, moving from one year to the next, a cartographer mapping the secret geography of her mother's heart. She learned the names of strangers and the stories of their hardships. She saw the patterns of her mother's generosity, how it flowed like an underground river, nourishing the roots of the community in ways no one ever saw. It was a lonely, sacred communion with the dead. But the real world, the world of deadlines and debts, would not wait. A letter arrived, delivered by a mail carrier who looked surprised to see any sign of life at the old diner. It was an official-looking envelope, cold and impersonal. Alara tore it open with trembling fingers. It was a final notice of foreclosure. The back taxes, compounded with fees and penalties, had reached a sum that seemed astronomical, impossible. She had 30 days to pay, or the county would seize the property and sell it at auction. 30 days. The number felt like a death sentence. The diner, which she had just discovered was a sacred place, was about to be ripped away and sold to the highest bidder, its history bulldozed, its secrets lost forever. That same afternoon, the phone rang. It was a cheap burner phone Arthur had given her, and it had only rung once before she answered, her voice hesitant. "Hello? Well, she answers. It was Clara." Her voice was like ice water, sharp and startling. "I was just calling to see how my favorite little entrepreneur is doing. Turning that dump into a gold mine yet?" The smug, feigned concern was more infuriating than open hostility. "It's fine," Alara said, her voice flat. "Oh, I'm sure it is," Clara purred. "I'm just so glad we could give you this opportunity, Alara. Really, it's so important to stand on your own 2 feet. There was a pause. "By the way," Clara added, her tone shifting, becoming sharper, "a developer friend of mine was asking about that corner lot. Prime spot for a gas station and convenience store, he thinks. He might be coming by to take a look at the property. Don't be alarmed if you see a fancy car in your parking lot. It wasn't a warning, it was a threat. She was circling, a vulture waiting for the inevitable. She wanted the land, and she was waiting for Alara to fail so she could swoop in and pick the bones. "It's not for sale," Alara said, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she had. Clara laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Oh, honey, everything is for sale. You'll learn that soon enough." She hung up. Alara stood in the middle of the diner, the foreclosure notice in one hand, the dead phone in the other. The walls seemed to be closing in. The weight of her mother's legacy and the impossibility of her own situation pressed down on her. She felt a wave of despair, cold and overwhelming. She had the truth, but the truth didn't pay taxes. She had the history, but history couldn't stop a bulldozer. She retreated to the pantry, to the hidden cabinet, the source of it all. She ran her hand over the remaining ledgers, her last connection to her mother's strength. There was one book left. She hadn't looked at closely. It was the very last one, from the final year. It was thinner than the others, only a few months of entries before the writing stopped. As she pulled it from the shelf, something slipped from between its pages and fell to the floor. It was a sealed envelope. On the front, in her mother's familiar slanted script, were 2 words, "My Alara." Her hand shook as she picked up the envelope. It was thick, made of heavy, cream-colored paper, the kind her mother had kept in a box for special occasions, but had rarely used. "My Alara." It was a voice from the grave, a final direct address. She sat down on the floor of the pantry with Gus's warm, solid weight pressed against her leg and carefully broke the seal. The letter inside was written on a single, folded sheet of the same paper. The ink was a dark, steady blue. "My dearest Alara," the letter began. If you are reading this, it means a few things. It means I am gone. It means your sisters have been exactly who I feared they would be. And it means you, my quiet girl, have been brave enough and clever enough to find my real work. I am so proud of you." The words blurred as tears welled in Alara's eyes. She blinked them back, forcing herself to read on. "I know you must be angry with Clara and Serena. Try to find it in your heart to forgive them one day. They measure the world with the wrong ruler. They see value only in things that can be sold. They were always that way, and I fear I was not a good enough mother to teach them otherwise. They will never understand this place. But you do. I always knew you did. You were the one who saw the people, not just the customers. You have my heart, Alara. You always have. I am leaving you with a burden, I know. This diner, these books, it is a heavy inheritance. For years I poured every spare dollar, every bit of my strength into this place and the people who passed through it. Not for profit, not for praise. I did it because a community is not a town. It's a web of people holding each other up. This diner was my corner of the web. I called these ledgers my real savings account, an investment in people. I always believed it was the safest investment there is. Now the account is yours, and I fear you will have to make a withdrawal. The foreclosure, the taxes, I knew this day would come. I ran out of time to fix it, so I am giving you my permission. I am giving you my blessing. Use these books. Call in the debts. Not for you. Not for money in your pocket, for the place. For this corner of the web, some of them won't be able to pay. Some will have forgotten. But some, I hope, will remember. People have longer memories for kindness than we give them credit for. Do not let them bulldoze our history, Alara. This place was never about making money. It was about making a place. A place where a hungry soul could find a full plate, no questions asked. A place that remembered a person's name. The letter ended with a line that made Alara's breath catch. A full plate is a paid bill, but a helping hand is an investment. Go, my love. Cash in our returns. All my love, Mom. Tucked into the fold of the letter was a small, black and white photograph. It was a picture of a much younger Lena, standing proudly in front of the brand new diner, the sign fresh and bright behind her. She was smiling, a wide, hopeful, fearless smile. Alara held the letter to her chest. It was not just a letter. It was a key. It was permission. It was a battle plan. Her mother had not left her defenseless. She had left her armed with the most powerful weapon of all. A 30-year history of unblemished goodness. The despair that had gripped her just moments before was burned away by a clean, hot flame of purpose. She would not let her mother's life's work be turned into a parking lot for a gas station. She stood up, the letter in her hand. She looked at the rows of ledgers, her mother's real savings account. She knew what she had to do. She would not be calling people to demand money. That was Clara's way. That was the way of the world that measured with the wrong ruler. She would do it her mother's way. She would simply open the books and let the story be told. She took a deep breath. It was time to call in the debts. The 30 days began to evaporate, each sunrise a stark reminder of the looming deadline. Alara felt the pressure like a physical weight, but the fear was gone, replaced by a resolute, almost calm sense of purpose. She had her mother's blessing. She had the ledgers, but she didn't know where to begin. The names in the books were a roll call of the last 3 decades. Some had moved away. Some, she knew, had passed on. How could she find them? How could she even start? The answer, as it so often did, came from across the street. Arthur appeared in the diner's doorway one afternoon, holding a wrench in one hand, his brow furrowed with worry. "You look like a ghost, kid," he said bluntly. "Whatever's eating at you is winning." Alara hesitated, then decided to trust him the way her mother had. She led him into the pantry and showed him the hidden cabinet, the rows of ledgers. She watched his face as she explained what they were, her voice low and steady in the quiet room. Arthur listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the books. He reached out and took one, the one from 1988. He ran his calloused thumb over the spine, then opened it to a random page. He was silent for a long time, his eyes scanning the familiar cursive. "I'll be damned," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I remember this. All of this." He pointed to an entry. "Fix the Miller boy's tire." "That boy," Arthur said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "That boy is Thomas Miller. Owns the biggest farm out on Route 4. Still, stubborn as a mule." He flipped a few more pages. "And here, Mrs. Gable. Lena paid for her heart medicine for a solid year. Her son is David Gable. He's a big-shot developer now. Lives over in the next county." He looked up at Alara, his eyes shining with a fierce protective light. "Kid," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This isn't a ledger, it's a map. It's a directory of every decent soul in a 50-mile radius." He closed the book and handed it to her. "Don't you dare call these people and ask for money," he commanded. "That's not Lena's way, you just show them. You just remind them." He took the 1988 ledger from her hands. "Let me borrow this one," he said. "I need to go see a man about a tire." The next day, a dusty pickup truck pulled into the diner's parking lot. A large man in his late 40s, his face weathered by the sun, got out and walked to the door. He peered in, looking uncertain. Ilara opened the door for him. "Can I help you?" she asked. The man twisted a dusty cap in his hands. "Are you Lena's daughter?" he asked, his voice deep and quiet. Ilara nodded. "My name is Thomas Miller," he said. "Arthur showed me something yesterday. A page from a book." He looked around the diner at the clean but worn interior. "Your mother. She fixed my tire once. I was 16. I was a stupid kid, and I had a flat, and I had no money. She didn't just feed me. She made sure I got home safe." He paused, swallowing hard. "I never paid her back for that tire. I meant to, but life gets in the way." He looked directly at Alara, his gaze clear and steady. "What does a new roof for this place cost?" And so it began. The next day an electrician showed up, the son of a man whose medical bills Lena had quietly helped pay. Then a plumber, a woman whose father had been given a job by Lena after losing his own. They came, not with money, but with toolboxes and willing hands. They were the dividends from her mother's investments, a silent army of gratitude, mustered by a single page from a book. The diner, quiet for so long, was now filled with the sounds of work. The whine of a saw, the tap of a hammer, the low murmur of people sharing stories about the woman who had helped them all. They were repaying their debt to Lena by rebuilding her legacy for her daughter. The climax arrived on a bright, cold Tuesday, with 1 week left before the foreclosure deadline. A sleek black sedan, the kind that looks like it costs more than a house, pulled into the lot. Clara got out of the passenger side dressed in a sharp-tailored coat. Serena followed, looking pale and anxious. From the driver's side emerged a man in an expensive suit, his face confident and appraising. "David Gable, the developer." Clara strode toward the diner, a triumphant smile on her face. She was here to show the developer the prime commercial lot to close the deal on the ruins of her mother's life. She pushed open the door and stopped dead. The diner was not empty and derelict. It was humming with life. The lights were on. The air smelled of fresh paint and sawdust. A half-dozen people were working, painting walls, fixing wiring, sanding the old wooden counter. Clara's smile faltered, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. David Gable stepped in behind her, his eyes taking in the scene. He saw the people working. He saw Alara, standing behind the counter, holding an open ledger. He saw Arthur, who simply nodded at him. Gable's professional detached expression softened. He walked over to the counter. "Are you Lena's girl?" he asked, his voice much gentler than his suit suggested. Alara nodded, her heart pounding. "My mother," he said, his voice low, "was Eleanor Gable. She told me about this place. She told me what your mother did for her for years. She made me promise that if I ever had the chance, I would pay it back." He looked from Alara to the ledger she was holding, then back to Clara, whose face had gone rigid with fury and confusion. He pulled a checkbook from his jacket pocket. He didn't ask how much was owed. He simply wrote, his pen moving swiftly across the paper. He tore the check out and slid it across the counter to Alara. It was for the full amount of the back taxes, with a great deal more besides. "That's a down payment," he said. "For my mother's account. It's paid in full." Then he turned to Clara, his face now cold and hard. "This place," he said, his voice ringing with authority through the now silent diner, "is a landmark. It's a testament, and it is not for sale." He looked at the worthless offer he held in his hand, the one Clara had so proudly presented to him. He tore it in half, then in half again, and let the pieces flutter to the floor. "You should be ashamed of yourself," he said to her, his voice quiet but cutting. The public humiliation was absolute. The community had not forgotten. The ledger had spoken. The debt was paid. Clara stood frozen for a moment, the torn pieces of her deal scattered at her feet like confetti at a funeral. Her face was a mask of disbelief, slowly cracking to reveal the raw, ugly fury beneath. The people in the diner had stopped working and were watching. Their expressions a mixture of pity and contempt. She had underestimated everyone. She had underestimated the power of her mother's quiet goodness, the length of the community's memory, and most of all, she had underestimated her quiet, overlooked little sister. Her gaze fell on Alara, and it was filled with a venom that was startling in its purity. "You!" she hissed, the word a small, sharp dart. "You did this!" Alara didn't flinch. She just stood her ground behind the counter that was her mother's, that was now hers, and met her sister's glare. She didn't need to say a word. The humming life of the restored diner, the presence of the people who had come to its aid, the check lying on the counter. It all spoke for her. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. It was Serena who broke it. A choked sob escaped her lips. All eyes turned to her. She had been standing by the door, a phantom in her sister's shadow, but now she seemed to collapse in on herself. The shame she had been carrying, the guilt she had tried to suppress, finally broke through the surface. Tears streamed down her face, washing away the carefully constructed facade of composure. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words ragged. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry." She looked at Alara, her eyes pleading. "She told us to look after you," Serena cried, her voice cracking. She said, "Take care of Alara. And I let you, I'm so sorry." It was a confession, raw and unscripted, in the center of the crowded room. It was the sound of a person breaking down and, perhaps, beginning to break open. While Clara's response to being thwarted was rage, Serena's was remorse. She took a stumbling step forward, away from Clara, a physical severing of their toxic alliance. She looked around at the half-painted walls, the stacks of clean dishes, the faces of her mother's friends. She saw for the first time not a failing business, but a living legacy. Without another word, she walked over to a stack of clean rags on a nearby table, picked one up, went to the grimy front window that hadn't yet been cleaned, just started scrubbing. It was a small, humble, desperate act. It was penance. It was an offer to begin making amends, not with words, but with labor. She was no longer the secondary antagonist, complicit in her sister's scheme. She was just Serena, a grieving daughter, trying to find her way back. Clara watched her sister's defection with a look of pure disgust. The last vestige of her support system had crumbled. She was alone in her greed, exposed and condemned by the very community she had disdained. She shot one last hateful look at Alara, then turned on her heel and stormed out of the diner, slamming the door behind her. The sound echoed, a final petulant punctuation mark on her defeat. No one watched her go. All eyes were on Serena, who was quietly, methodically, washing the window, her tears mingling with the soapy water on the glass. The unredeemed had fled. The repentant remained. The community chorus, the men and women who had come to work, slowly turned back to their tasks, the crisis having passed. The sound of hammering and sanding resumed, a gentle, constructive rhythm that filled the space left by Clara's destructive exit. Arthur walked up to the counter and looked at Alara. He nodded toward Serena. "Some people just get lost," he said quietly. "Takes them a while to find the right road back." "Purr. Your mother knew that." Alara looked at her sister, her back bent to the task of cleaning, and felt not triumph, but a deep, aching pity. She picked up the check David Gable had left. It was more than enough. It was a new beginning. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she walked out from behind the counter, went to the coffee machine that the electrician had just gotten working, and brewed the first pot of coffee the diner had seen in years. The aroma, rich and dark and full of promise, filled the room. It smelled like forgiveness. It smelled like hope. She poured a cup, walked over to her sister, and held it out. Serena looked up, startled, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She looked at the cup, then at Alara's outstretched hand. Hesitantly, she reached out and took it. Their fingers brushed. It was the first time they had touched in months. It was a start. The diner reopened on a crisp Saturday in late autumn. There was no grand opening, no ribbon to be cut. One morning, the closed sign was simply flipped to open, and the smell of coffee and frying bacon drifted out onto the highway for the first time in a very long time. Alara named the first day Lena's Day. She didn't charge for anything. Every plate of food was on the house. A thank you to the community that had saved the place. The diner was full from sunup to sundown. People came not just to eat, but to be there, to share in the victory. Thomas Miller sat in a booth with his family, eating a steak dinner. David Gable sat at the counter sipping a coffee, looking at the clean, bright space with a quiet satisfaction. The plumber, the electrician, the painters, they were all there, no longer workers, but customers, friends, family. Arthur held court in a corner booth, telling stories about Lena to a new generation. Gus, wearing a new collar Arthur had bought him, lay by the kitchen door, accepting pats and praise like a visiting dignitary. Behind the counter, Alara moved with a grace and confidence that surprised even herself. She worked the grill, poured coffee, and took orders, her movements echoing her mother's, a dance she hadn't realized she knew by heart. In the back, at the big dishwashing sink, Serena worked silently and tirelessly. She had shown up every day since the confrontation, never asking for anything, just picking up a rag or a broom and finding what needed to be done. She worked with a focused, humble intensity, as if she could wash away her guilt with every plate she scrubbed clean. Alara paid her a fair wage, which Serena tried to refuse, but Alara insisted. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a path. It was a chance to earn her way back, one day, one dish at a time. The money from David Gable had cleared the debts and provided a cushion to restock the pantry and pay the bills. Alara refused to take any of it for herself. It belonged to the diner. It was the place's money, not hers. She had learned from her mother that true wealth wasn't in an account. It was in a full pantry and the ability to give a free meal to someone who needed it. The greedy had been exposed, and meaning had been chosen over money. The found family, the one Arthur had spoken of, had cohered. It was a family bound not by blood, but by shared history and mutual aid, a web of connections her mother had spent a lifetime weaving. Alara was no longer the lonely, overlooked girl. She was the keeper of the flame, the proprietor of Lena's place, a vital part of the community that had embraced her. The diner became what it had always been meant to be, not just a place to eat, but a center of gravity for the town, a place to gather, to talk, to connect. The truckers came back, their big rigs filling the parking lot. The locals made it their morning coffee spot. Everyone had a story about Lena, and they shared them with Alara, filling in the gaps of her memory, painting a fuller portrait of the woman she had so loved. In the pantry, the hidden cabinet remained. The ledgers were all back in their place, a silent, powerful library of goodwill. They were a reminder, a constitution. Alara found she didn't need to consult them. Their lessons were now written on her heart. The days settled into a comfortable routine. The 5 a.m. starts, the familiar weight of the coffee pot, the sizzle of eggs on the grill. Alara felt her mother's presence not as a haunting, but as a quiet, steadying guidance. She was not just repeating her mother's actions, she was continuing her mother's work. The grief for what was lost was still there, a soft ache in the quiet moments, but it was no longer a crippling weight. It had been transformed into purpose. The loss had been made bearable because it had been made meaningful. One evening after the last customer had left and Serena had quietly departed for the small room she was renting in town, Alara was wiping down the counter. Arthur came in as he often did at the end of the day. He sat on his usual stool. "She would be proud of you, kid," he said, his voice soft. "Prouder than you know." Alara smiled, a real, genuine smile. "I know," she said. And she did. She looked around the warm, clean, quiet diner. The lights hummed. Gus snored softly by the door. On the counter, next to the register, sat a small, worn wooden lemon reamer in a glass, a silent testament to a legacy passed on. This was home. Winter came, blanketing the highway in a soft, forgiving layer of white. The neon sign, which Thomas Miller's cousin had repaired for the cost of a few pies, cast a warm, welcoming glow over the snowy parking lot. Inside the diner was an island of warmth and light. Business was steady, not booming, but enough. Enough to pay the bills, keep the pantry stocked, and keep the coffee hot. Alara had found her rhythm, a life of simple, meaningful work that filled her days and quieted her heart. Serena was still there, still quiet, still washing dishes. But the frantic, desperate energy was gone, replaced by a sort of calm. She and Alara had started talking more, not about the past, but about small things. The weather, a funny customer, the best way to get a stubborn stain off a pot. They were rebuilding, one fragile sentence at a time. One snowy, wind-swept night, long after most folks were home, the sound of a car sputtering and dying echoed from the highway. A few minutes later, the diner door opened, and a young couple with 2 small, sleeping children bundled in their arms stumbled in, their faces numb with cold and worry. Their car had broken down. They had no money for a tow truck, let alone a motel. They looked lost and afraid. Alara saw them, and in their faces she saw a reflection of 100 stories from her mother's ledgers. She smiled a warm, genuine smile. "Come on in out of that cold," she said, her voice the calm, steady anchor they needed. "The booths are warm." She led them to the corner booth, the one Arthur claimed as his own. She brought them blankets she kept in the back, the ones Lena had used for the stranded bus passengers during the blizzard all those years ago. The husband and wife huddled together, their relief palpable. Alara went back into the kitchen. She didn't ask them what they wanted, she knew. She fired up the grill and made 4 grilled cheese sandwiches, the bread thick and buttery, the cheese melting perfectly. She heated milk on the stove and whisked in chocolate, filling 4 mugs with steaming hot cocoa, topped with whipped cream. She carried the tray out to the booth. The parents looked up at her, their eyes full of a gratitude so profound it needed no words. The children, now awake, stared at the food with wide, sleepy eyes. "On the house," Alara said, before they could even ask. "Eat up!" She left them to their meal and went back behind the counter. She pulled out a brand new, clean ledger, the first one she had started for herself. She clicked the end of her pen. Under that night's date, she made her first entry, her handwriting neat and clear, so much like her mother's. The entry didn't list food items or prices. It just said, "Helped a family car broke down, paid in full." She closed the book. The work continued. The legacy was alive. A full plate is a paid bill, but a helping hand is an investment. And some investments, she now knew, pay dividends forever. The final, quiet image of the night was of the small, worn wooden lemon reamer, sitting in its glass next to the new ledger, catching the warm light of the diner. A silent promise that what is good and true will always endure.